All right, let's try to do something different. I'm Chris Cuomo. Let's get after it. What's the big news? Hunter Biden, guilty on all counts, right? Everybody has that correct. But that's where the consensus ends. It's all about what it means and forwarding agendas. So let's get it straight. Why is Hunter Biden guilty? Because he did it, okay? Yes, he's an addict. Yes, that may well have influenced his ideas about his own use or abuse of drugs. But he still lied on the form, period. Why was Trump found guilty? Because he did it. He faked business records to make Michael Cohen look like something other than a guy being repaid for making payoffs. He did it. The juries in both cases were not about bias. They were about basic analysis. Both deserve respect. It was not complicated in either case, at least in terms of the law and the facts. It's the politics that makes everything crazy. The point to contest is why either case was brought in the first place. And you know why. Trump sicked a special prosecutor on the Bidens, and the district attorney Bragg promised to get Trump. That's why we had these cases. Neither one should have been brought. And this isn't some both sides BS. This is just the truth. It's never enough for the two parties in their game of advantage. Now, why? Because this is easier than dealing with the real issues. Saying which is worse is easier than having to measure up to you, to level up for you in terms of how they fix. Keeping us divided works better and is easier than fixing anything. We all know that now. We get it. So you have to listen that way. For instance, Hunter Biden is not enough. So what do they go to? Hold it. Let's go back to Joe Biden and the fact that he's brain dead. They can't stop talking about that. Why? Because that's easier than saying they have better ideas than he does. You see what I'm saying? So for the right, Hunter Biden's not enough. It's about the Biden crime family and that Joe Biden can't possibly do the job. That's why it's all about this first debate. That narrative is going to be made true or false at this debate. I'm telling you, that's going to be it. That's the only reason I can't wait for it to happen, because I don't really like debates. I think there should be no moderator. I think their performance. I don't think they get to the right things. But this one is going to matter. And we also now know, with this case and the case before it, there is abuse of the process. There is lawfare. And if the right wants to call it out, they should. But they better stop practicing it and get back to our common concerns, or really just get to our common concerns, because they weren't about them in the first place. So let's talk about what happened today. We set a new low. Hunter Biden, officially the first child of a sitting president to be convicted of a crime. What interesting history. What was it? 2 counts for lying on an ATF form. He did. He lied. He said he was not addicted or abusing drugs while purchasing the weapon. And that's a lie. So he's guilty. And the 3rd count was for illegally possessing the gun. Yes, that's a redundant charge, but that's the way they do it. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. But the process is telling. One juror said that the first time they voted, they were split 6-6. 6 people thought he was not guilty. Why? And then just a couple of hours after reconvening, which means what happened overnight? I wonder what they saw on TV, right? The next morning, they'd all changed their minds. Again, why? That's what's interesting to me about this. So let's bring in attorney for Hunter Biden in a separate matter, Mark Geragos, former New York City prosecutor Paul Callan, jury consultant Susan Constantine, and NewsNation correspondent at large and the best-looking man in the business, Geraldo Rivera. Mark Geragos,
thanks, Chris.
I start with you, and I want to poach. You have access to people that I do not in Biden land. What are you hearing from the defense team?
Well, look, I will tell you that I think Hunter has set the tone by just saying, look, he respects the jury's decision. I think he disagrees with it, as do I. I agree with you. This is a case that never should have been brought. And if you're one of the people who is complaining about the prosecution of Trump and you're not complaining or you're cheering about this, then that tells you more than you need to know. But I think that from Hunter's perspective, this is certainly not the worst or lowest point in his life. Nobody wants to be convicted of multiple felonies, but certainly he's had bigger tragedies than this. Just think about Bo and the death of his brother. Think about the death of his mother. Think about the death of his sister. I mean, this is a family that has had, enough shares of tragedy in their life. This hardly qualifies in the top 20. So I think he's got an attitude that people who are in recovery are remarkably resilient sometimes in ways that you don't quite understand, I think, if you haven't been confronted with that. So I think he's resilient. I think he's going to fight on. And frankly, you want me to prognosticate, this circuit hasn't definitively ruled yet, but this circuit, I think odds on are going to say that this case doesn't stand. And if they don't, I think SCOTUS at some point is going to weigh in and strike this. You can't have a status then wipe out a constitutional right.
The Second Amendment you're talking about. Look, on a personal level, what he and the people who care about him and the infrastructure he better have around him as someone in recovery, this is called a stress point. And this is a time where somebody who's dealing with what he has to as a function of disease better make sure he's on his game and on his routine. Geraldo, words I rarely say. You were wrong. I was right in terms of how this was going to turn out. But, of course, it was a 50-50 proposition. What did it mean to you? And then I'm going to get the same take from Susan Constantine as a different type of expert, that they were 6-6, and then they came back the next day and decided like that. What does that mean to you?
Well, let me go back to your scolding point before I get there. I was definitely wrong. I thought the jury, the hometown jury, would nullify the government's argument. I thought it was they did an excellent job. I thought the defense in portraying him as the wounded poet. How could he not do that? He was in the throes of addiction. Then miraculously, he came clean just in time to buy the gun. And then, he fell back into the sewer. I feel about him that he is, the more you know, the less you like him. He is on best behavior now. You talk about a touch point. I think he could explode at any minute. I agree that the statute under which he was convicted was used in a way that is constitutionally suspect, and the Supreme Court is reviewing these status cases. They've got a domestic abuser. Does he have the right to have a gun? They're going to go through the various levels, Dante's Inferno of hell there, and mark it off. In terms of Hunter Biden, though he is someone who has been a user his whole life, people are more willing to cut him slack than perhaps I have been, because I think I know enough about that class of people to know how manipulative, how charming they could be, how they could fool you until they kill you, right, or hurt you grievously. Where this goes now, one thing I want to say about the difference between this and Trump. In Hunter Biden's case, at least there was a statute that was reasonable on its face, at least. With Trump in New York, that was a contorted, bloated machination that had politics, the stink of politics all over it. I think Trump has a more righteous reason to be pissed off. But I feel more sorry, of course, for Hunter Biden, because I feel sorry for the Biden family. They tried so hard. Jill came from Normandy. She sat in the front row surrounded by the whole Biden clan. But it was not the prosecution that put Hunter's daughter on the witness stand to be tortured. It was the defense that did that. And according to the jury, and going back to your question about why was it 6-6, because I think 6 of them really were angry with the defense for doing that, exploiting or attempting to exploit the daughter.
Maybe I would feel a modicum of sympathy for Trump if he hadn't lied about the situation in the first place, and if he hadn't clearly tried to hide it by making the repayment of Michael Cohen look like something other than it was. So as with Hunter Biden, he did it. Should it have been brought? No. Was it political? Yes. Susan Constantine, 6-6, and then the next morning, boom. Not that unusual, but what does the dynamic generally suggest to someone with your expertise?
Well, when we look at the jury panel, 12 people, 6 of them both split. Generally speaking, that first ballot vote is really telling. The fact that they were split, oftentimes it sways towards prosecution, but not always. But here's what I think what happened. I don't think those jurors understood the verdict form. So the next day when they came back, and especially what's been coming out in all of the news, is that they had to go through each one of those charges and understand it completely. And then it didn't take them any time at all for them to come to the conclusion that he was guilty on all those 3 counts. But here's one of the other things I'd like to mention. This is a Democratic state, right? And so we know that those jurors were more pro-defense when I'm looking at their jury profile than they were pro-prosecution. So what changed? One of the things that comes to my mind is really the gun violence. One of the jurors lost a family member, a father who died because of gun violence. Do you not think that the African-American community is over and done and tired of gun violence? I think that really had a big impact on that jury verdict.
That's an interesting take. I appreciate that, Susan. Brother Callan, the argument is policy on this. Mark Aragos alludes to that in terms of the irony that the right was so psyched to see Hunter Biden go down, even though they don't like to see any restrictions on Second Amendment rights. And now you are de facto, let's say, putting in a restriction, which is we can take away your right if you don't fill out a form honestly for us. Are you worried about that policy consideration and review or appeal of this case?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I agree with that analysis, because a lot of the criticism from the right that I saw today in most of the press was sort of sympathetic to Hunter and was saying that this was just an attempt to avoid going after the Bidens on their real crimes, which, of course, is taking money from China and Ukraine. So there was a certain amount of tone of almost sympathy for Hunter Biden.
Sympathy or dissatisfaction that it wasn't enough, Paul? I think maybe you're mistaking dissatisfaction because they want what Sean Hannity calls the, who's a friend of mine, the Biden crime family, that it's not enough to get Hunter. They just want more satisfaction. Well, that's right.
No, but what they're saying is that this was a phony case just to throw a bone to the public, that the Bidens were really looked at and they were cleared because this is the only thing Biden bad that's happened. I think that's how some conservatives view it. But getting back to the policy question on the law that we have here, I don't think it's going to be I disagree with Mr. Garagos. I don't think it's going to be thrown out by the Supreme Court. And I also think the public strongly agrees that we don't want crack addicts buying guns, okay? If you listen to the president's speech today, which was one of the fiercest, toughest speeches I've ever seen him make on the need for stringent gun control regulations and enforcement of those regulations. And by the way, he as a senator signed off on this very law, and he, as president, signed off on increasing the penalties for this law because he strongly believes that we have to eliminate this kind of gun possession.
But this isn't who they were targeting. You know what the policy was of who they wanted to capture with this, and it's not Hunter Biden. But Mark Garagos, let me ask you something different that I think probably matters more than the specific analysis. How the hell are you supposed to do your job if the new normal is we don't like who this guy is, we're going to find the man and then find the crime? What does that say about how our politics goes going forward? This can't be the last time we see this. It's going to be, Garagos is running against us. All right, let's dig in. Let's find a way to get a guy on him. And if we have somebody in power, let's get a special prosecutor on him. Easy to do. It gives this facade of fairness. How are you supposed to do the job if the process is no more than political preference in terms of who they get?
You know, there was a former chief judge in the Ninth Circuit who stepped down, ironically enough, because he was investigated after he made the statement. But he said at one point, and I don't remember if it was in an oral argument or in an opinion, that you couldn't find a single male that was breathing, who an enterprising U.S. attorney couldn't find 3 violations of the United States Code, who was walking around. So, I mean, if you've ever looked at the United States Code federally, it's frightening, the kind of breadth and depth of violations that you can concoct, which goes back or circles back to your kind of initial monologue, which is part of what people don't understand is that the prosecutor, unlike a defense lawyer is there to zealously defend his client. A prosecutor is not there to zealously try to convict somebody. A prosecutor is held to a higher standard, and that means you're supposed to be looking for justice. You're not supposed to be trying to convict people at any cost, and the most important thing of all is prosecutorial discretion. Right. Whether or not you bring a case. That is the sine qua non of what a good or a bad prosecutor is that ability, that judgment, that discretion.
Geraldo, they used to have, and you know this, and I you've done this so many times over the years, they have these meetings, the feds, before they decide to prosecute, where they bring in defense counsel. Okay? And they have a discussion with you. Now, it used to be that something could happen in that meeting where a good counsel would come in and be like, man, you got this wrong. And my experience now in the last 5, 6, 7 years is those are pro forma meetings. They bring you in to say, we're coming after your guy unless he or she is going to flip right now and tell us what we want him to tell us, or we're coming. I think that this is the new normal, that it's not about, it's like the old Russian proverb with the guy I couldn't remember, and then everybody had to Google me the answer. Give me the man, I'll show you the crime. I think that's our new normal now.
But the other way of saying that is the district attorney can indict a ham sandwich. Yeah. And we extol the virtue of our justice system, and yet we say, as Mark just put it, that if you wanted to, you could find 3 violations of the U.S. Code on every male in America. But that's why lawfare is so obnoxious to me. That's why weaponizing the Justice Department is so obnoxious to me. That's why the Trump era is different than any time in our professional lives, where where impeachment used to be once every 200 odd years. Now it's every 200 days.
But I think it only gets worse.
Justice system,
especially if Trump gets rival,
it's pathetic.
I think especially if Trump gets in, I see a reality, and I don't think it's a threat. I bet you Trump might not even disagree with this, where you come after him, he's going to have people look at you. Let's take a look at Geraldo's taxes. Wait, what did Callan say? Let's take a look at him. Let's see how he's doing on what he shows his profits. Can you call the IRS? See what they got there. They've been kind of doing that already. I think they're just going to start doing it out loud, Paul. This is how we play.
I think these 2 cases are that.
Yeah.
These 2 cases, Trump and Biden, Biden Jr., these are exactly what you just said.
But I think they opened the door.
Just let me rock the boat on this theory for a minute, okay? Because let's not forget how this case started. Hunter Biden was offered, this is the deal he was offered. As to the gun charges, we're going to forget about them. We're going to dismiss them if he goes into a diversion program. And by the way, those charges that are now in California for millions of dollars in failure to pay taxes, or which were paid late, he'll get a guarantee of a non-incarceration sentence on those 2. Yeah. That's the plea he was offered. And that's the plea that blew up and led to this trial.
Why?
So this was not why.
Why? Why did it blow up?
Well, I think because Biden's attorneys pushed too hard on adding another clause to the agreement, which
That's not why it
he
blew
wanted
up, Paul.
immunity.
It blew up because when word came out that he was getting a deal,
the
right went crazy. And they pulled the deal, and the judge said, boy, I've never heard of a deal like this before. That's what happened. Look, I'm telling you, Paul, maybe I'm paranoid.
They were walking out of the room because they didn't like the wording on the immunity promise.
The judge said, I've never heard of a deal like this. And all of a sudden it was gone. I'm just saying, maybe I'm paranoid, but I'm certainly not cynical. And I see this as happening more, not less, because nobody's pissed off about it enough at this point. All right, I got to jump. Susan Constantine, I spoke to you less, but you're the most value. So thank you very much for being with me. Geraldo, I appreciate you. Paul Callan, I appreciate you. Mark Garagos, as always. Thank you all of you, each of you, for being a gift to the audience. We never have better panels. You'll never find better panels than we have on NewsNation. If you want to know what things mean, nobody brings more to the table than these guys and this woman. Nobody does the job more. Nobody does the job better. I hope it works for you. 4 minutes, 5 seconds. Coming up. Lot of controversy. Secret recordings of the Alitos and of Justice Roberts. They didn't know they were being recorded. And guess what you are when you're not aware that you're being recorded? You're honest. What did these Supreme Court justices betray with their candor? New insight into whether justice is blind. Next. We now know that Justice Alito believes Christians must fight to get the country back, and that his wife believes that as a German, that means she's going to come after you if you come at her. How do we know? Secret recordings released by activist filmmaker Lauren Windsor. She posed as a religious conservative and recorded the Alitos and Justice Roberts at a recent gala. Legal? Yes. Ethical? You tell me. Here is what Alito's wife, Martha Ann, said when asked about the recent flag flying controversy at the Alito's home. Remember this upside-down flag, that's the nation in distress, and this religious flag were displayed last year, flags both embraced by election deniers and Trump supporters, same thing, on January 6th.
You know what I want? I want a Sacred Heart of Jesus flag because I have to look across the lagoon at the Pride flag for the next month.
Exactly.
He's like, oh, please don't put up a flag. I said, I won't do it because I'm deferring to you. But when you are free of this nonsense, I'm putting it up and I'm going to send them a message every day. Maybe every week I'll be changing the flags. The feminazis believe that he should control me.
Yeah.
So we'll go to hell. He never controls me.
Very telling. We'll discuss why in a second. But first, the recordings also give you an earful of reality about the fact that justices absolutely have political and religious biases, just like the rest of us, maybe even more so. Why do I say that? Listen.
I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. One side or the other is going to win. There can be a way of working, a way of living together peacefully, but it's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised.
People in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that, to return our country to a place of godliness.
Oh, I agree with you.
Revealing. But the most important clip to me was Justice Roberts, what he said on camera. I'm going to play that for you. But first, let's bring in the person who made the secret recordings, advocacy journalist, filmmaker, Lauren Windsor. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Chris.
So, absolutely legal. The stink on this is you had the right to do it, but was it right to do it? Why was this ethical and righteous in purpose by your estimation, Lauren?
Well, to all the pearl clutchers out there, when you have a Supreme Court that is shrouded in secrecy and doing its best to avoid any ethics accountability, I think that extreme measures are warranted. I don't think the founders ever intended for public, servants to just be rogue.
Do you believe that any of the things that were said were baited by you and not what the Alitos or Justice Roberts believed on their own?
Well, so, I have a lot of criticism against me about Justice Alito's responses, but there's a reason that I juxtapose the conversation that I had with him in 2023 versus the conversation that I had with him in 2024. And additionally, with the response of Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Alito could have responded in either of those ways. In 2023, he said, I don't know if there's a solution to repairing the polarization. I don't know. I don't know if we have a role. And then Chief Justice Roberts was more emphatic in similar questions. Do you want me deciding morality? Are we really polarized? This is, it's, relatively speaking, fairly tumultuous in a lot of different instances. And it's not our job to do that. It's our job to decide the cases. Justice Alito could have responded with either of those things the way he did the year before, or with Chief Justice Roberts, and he did not do that. So I don't think that I was baiting him. I think that it coaxed him into a position that either was already held or that he came to that over the past year.
Do you think that if you were to surreptitiously record the lefty justices, they would say things that people might find equally offensive?
I think it's easy for anybody to find anything offensive, so sure, yeah. But I don't think it's a matter of degree. And I just don't think that any of the liberal justices would say something that would betray a sense of, we can't be impartial to the cases that are before this court. And when you talk about impartiality, it really is a bedrock principle of our country, of the judiciary. And if you are saying, let me backtrack for a moment. Most people know and believe that Justice Alito is an ideologue, but it's quite another thing to have him saying in his own words that he can't be impartial, because he's saying there's some things that can't be compromised.
Right.
So
I don't know that that's the same thing
when
as
you're
him
talking,
saying, it's not the same thing as him saying he's impartial, but what it is it shows that he has a preference. And that's why something else you referred to, I think we got to play for the audience, because to me it was the biggest surprise. Maybe I'm a cynic, but what Justice Roberts said to you in a session where he had every reason to just say what he wanted to say, and he was or was not aware of what Alito had been saying to you. Listen to what Justice Roberts said in a very key question that Lauren Windsor asked him. Listen to this.
We're Christians, and I think that we live in a Christian nation, and that our Supreme Court should be guiding us in that path.
Yeah, I don't know that we live in a Christian nation. I know a lot of Jewish and Muslim friends who would say maybe not, and it's not our job to do that. It's our job to decide the cases as best we can.
I don't know why it says Thomas. It was supposed to be Roberts. But you know what? It's interesting, Lauren, because Alito is exactly who I thought he was, and Roberts is exactly who I hoped he'd be. I got to tell you, I don't even know if I would have given that answer, let alone a guy who's on the Supreme Court. Were you impressed that he backed away from someone who's supposed to be one of his own at this dinner?
I wasn't really impressed. I mean, I was happy that he didn't take the bait, of course, but his actions really, or I should say his words belie his actions, because he's still enabling the ideologues on the court by not reining in the, very sort of brazen, very ideological behavior of Justices Alito and Thomas and others.
It's very hard for him, though. The problem with the checks and balances is that the Supreme Court isn't really overseen by Congress. They kind of are, but their rules that they follow are their own. So we do need reform there. But, ultimately, do you think that what you're showing here is this is the reality, and what really needs to change is the confirmation process, where these men and women, they vote with the party that puts them in so often. We know the names of the ones that don't. So should we just change the confirmation process so these men and women have to speak to their politics?
I don't know how that would work in practice. Practically, how would you, if an administration is putting forth a particular justice, and this justice is supposed to be impartial. This is, again, a bedrock principle of our secular democracy. How do you actually enact that kind of policy? And I think that really what it has to be is there has to be some enactment of ethics reform. People would like to question me about my ethics, but I would say, is it more unethical for me to pretend to be a fangirl, or is it more unethical for a Supreme Court justice to not disclose millions of dollars of gifts from GOP donors?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a two wrongs make a right. I mean, look, that's sneaky, but it's legal, and you were doing it to evince what they really felt. And the right certainly has no problem when Veritas was running around doing it with people, whether they were drunk or sober or anything else. So it's more like, you like it when it works for you. You don't like it when it doesn't work for you. I appreciate the reality that you produced with it, Lauren Windsor, and I thank you for coming on to talk to us about how it went down and why. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here, Chris. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Coming up, a leader of the Democratic Congressional Caucus. Okay, this guy's going to be a leader. He's a leader now, and he's going to be a future leader in this country. On why America should cut a deal with Hamas directly, if we should at all, and what the verdict today means for the election and for the Democratic Party. Ro Khanna, next. Last night, you remember we showed you video of the 4 hostages being freed, rescued in Gaza. I don't know why people are saying they were released. I mean, how are you going to complain about the people who were killed on the ground and then say they were released? It doesn't even make sense, let alone play to what should matter in this situation. 120 more hostages are still being held by Hamas.